Hello, I'm Alex Metricardi, Chief Marketing and Public Relations Officer for Living Branches, and today is Thursday, September 17th. Welcome to another video with Ed Brubaker, our President and CEO at Living Branches. So here we are.
Here we are, and it's good morning today.
Yes,
good morning,
it is.
Alex.
Good morning, Ed. Well, let's start with happy news from Harmony House, which is our memory care area on the Dock Woods campus, where we had previously had one staff person who tested positive for COVID. And so as a result of that, we've done 2 rounds of testing for all staff and residents in Harmony House. And so far, everyone is negative.
Yeah, that's correct, and that is good news. And so hopefully, I think we're testing today or tomorrow, and perhaps today and tomorrow, and hopefully then we can go back and go through the phases again to reopen. And it just shows you the power of one person and the impact they have. And it's certainly, it could happen to any of us potentially. I mean, this person is not sure where she may have picked it up and feels that she was doing safe things. So one doesn't fully know where one may get it. Could be from family members or wherever. But it could happen to people, but we do try to do the safe things so we can keep it as low as possible. The interesting thing in that particular case, she had so many of the checkbox symptoms that we actually went into close down mode before we got the results of her test. And that turned out to be the wise decision in that case. We don't always do that in cases where there's suspicion, but she just had kind of all the classic symptoms. And so we felt it was wise to do that. And I'm not saying that's why we're having the good results, but it certainly helps, I think.
I found that really interesting and encouraging because I was a part of those meetings, of course, in the coronavirus response team. And both Dr. Hamowitz, our medical director, and Mary Sheehan, our infection control person, said very clearly, when I look at these symptoms, we're pretty confident that she's going to test positive. And I mean, you looked at that and said the same thing. These are classic symptoms. And then a week later, we had another case at another campus where we said, no, let's get those test results because this might be it, but it doesn't feel like it. And that was right. She tested negative.
Yeah, that's right. And in that particular case, too, on the other campus, she had some of the symptoms, but not as many as the other person. But they were also connected to things that she more commonly had as symptoms for other things that she may have had issues with. And so you consider all those things. And I remember the meeting we talked about, the other one that we did close down the campuses, and it's a big deal to do that. And I maybe at initial first blush may have annoyed some people as I kept asking questions, but it also shows the value of the group coming together, different perspectives, different people seeing it, and different people saying, wait a minute, how do we need to do that? And that's really the benefit of a team coming together and evaluating these things. So again, it may not have been the reason we have had success, because I really do think mask wearing is a big part of that. A huge part of our ability to control the spread more. But certainly doing those things are important to keep the spread from going and moving.
Yeah. Well, and this ties in nicely. We've spent a lot of time talking about testing, but this is just another situation that demonstrates the need to have good, reliable, fast tests.
Right, that's right. And one of the challenges we're running into now is we did get the BD rapid antigen test, point of care test, and it doesn't have as high a true positivity rate that we would like to see. I think it's around 84%, so we were kind of disappointed when we got that instead of Quidel. But the challenge is then we have had with that particular equipment somewhat turned out to be false positives. And so we certainly, when we get the positive, we send the staff person home. But then our policy is that we'll do a PCR test to confirm that, because that's a more accurate test. Well, in the cases we've done the PCR to date, all 3 persons were then negative PCR. And you can see the big implications, because if you go based on a positive and you start shutting down a facility, it has big implications. So we need to be sure of it. The challenge is, what are we expected to do with a positive test from a rapid antigen test? What does the government or regulatory agencies expect? And so, at least for this month, I was just talking with Bruce Alder and Ann Groshans this morning. And probably for this month of testing, we're going to go back to just doing PCR because it creates anxiety, and we need to determine, too, what is the expectation. Because our internal expectation is it's confirmed with a PCR, but the benefit is if it is positive, we get them out of there as quickly as possible. That's the nice thing because you have the results. If it's a negative result, we understand that to be a very high rate of correctness, if you will. And so it's really trying to find that place. And I think the tests will keep getting better. And we do absolutely see this as a way to open our campuses more appropriately in the future. The challenge is we're not there yet. And frankly, to be honest, it's probably going to be the end of the year or even early next till we have some really good rapid tests that can be used for visitors, et cetera. It's going to be some period of time. And I know that's disappointing, but we're trying to keep our attention to it. Ann Groshans is working on these things for us to try to understand what's coming so that we can be working at getting those things in here, because it absolutely is part of our plans for the future, because this thing is going to be around for a while, regardless of what you may hear or read. And some people say this and some people say this. Even if a vaccine is available in October, I don't feel it will be, but some people talk about that. But let's say even early next year or mid next year, till you get people vaccinated, it's going to take some time. So we need other plans in place too, and continue to feel that testing is part of it, but we want that rapid testing to keep getting better in the accuracy rates.
Yeah, it was so nice, especially when our case first happened in Harmony House. You know, I thought that was a great situation where we found out about this later at night. For us, one of the big concerns always is staffing, is we have to have people on staff, but now we find they've been exposed. We don't want them spreading. So the ability to go in with that rapid test and get results back in a few minutes so that we could feel confident that these people do not have the virus right now, like that's invaluable. But as we've done this more, we are seeing a higher number of people then who come out with a positive test from the rapid test, that when we go back and have them tested traditionally, it comes back negative.
That's true, but we knew that going into it,
yes,
too, because we knew that BD had a positivity accuracy rate of 84%. So we're still well within that. But you're absolutely right with the point of the benefit is the quick turnaround, that we can take action quickly. The downside is, since it isn't in the 90s or close to 100%, you can get those false positives. And then you can imagine the anxiety that's created for the staff person that then needs to be put out of work, not just being put out of work and the challenges of staffing, but then also their own personal, like, oh no, I have COVID and I thought I was being so careful, et cetera. So there's a lot of things to consider, but clearly getting a test that is pretty high in accuracy is a key part of the process.
It's interesting that you had mentioned like the personal angst that someone would feel. Mike, our videographer, and I were walking to different campuses, interviewing staff members, and I almost forget the personal responsibility so many of our staff members feel to not be the one who brings this on campus. They are trying so hard to be careful.
Yeah, that's right. And the flip side is we don't want to push that so hard that if someone does get it through, in some ways, no fault of their own, that they don't feel crushed. But you're absolutely right. And that's a positive thing, too, and a positive thing for people watching this video to understand. Our staff is not taking this thing lightly, and they are working so hard to keep it out of here. And I think doing a great job. We had some clear, very significant challenges and people who died. And so that was very sad and very hard for staff too. But we were still learning so much, and we can't guarantee that will never happen again. But we have learned so much, and certainly just the act of wearing a mask makes such a difference. So we're at a much better place, but our staff has really worked hard and really takes this seriously and really care and love our residents very, very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One interesting thing that happened this week in the news, maybe you want to touch on just briefly, and that is there was, I guess, a ruling in a lawsuit against the governor or the state of Pennsylvania. And I've had a few people saying, well, what does that mean for us?
Yeah, and it's a good question. It's interesting and unfortunate, I would say, that it feels like almost anything today has the political intrigue, background to it, and this is not. This is in that category as well. That I won't get into that piece of it, but there's that backstory as well. Having said that, what is being challenged more has to do with businesses opening, hair salons, other types of businesses that maybe were more restricted. There may be some things around numbers of people how many can gather, that kind of thing. And it really comes down to, frankly, the reality is it's not about safety and security. I think people need to keep that in mind. This is really an issue of what power does the governor have versus the legislature. And so we need to keep that in mind too, because if it does stand, and it's going to be appealed, but if it does stand, it doesn't mean this stuff is safe. It just means that the governor was ruled not to have that authority to make that call, as I would understand it. And so it's important to keep that in mind. It doesn't really change a whole lot for us, to be perfectly blunt about it, because we're still subject to personal care regulations and personal care. We're still subject to healthcare regulations and healthcare, and those regulations are not impacted whatsoever by this ruling. And so we also recognize too, we serve the most vulnerable population, and so it really doesn't impact us much going forward. We're still going to do the right things for our residents, and it's not going to change what we're doing. But I certainly can understand people say, this seems to be a big deal. How does it impact us? And the reality is it really doesn't impact us a whole lot.
Well, and I've heard you say before, when it comes to like the number of persons in a room, this limit could be 10, the limit could be 25. If one person has it, that's too many.
Yeah, if my wife and I are together and she has COVID, that's one person too many that I'm interacting with. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so it really has more to do with trying to figure out some way of allowing social human beings to come together. It may or may not be technically safe if you're totally about managing risk, but it's really about managing that reality so that people don't go absolutely stir crazy, but have some balance in there. That's what it's really all about. It doesn't necessarily mean it's safe.
Another question I had this week was from a resident who had been watching my video last week where I was talking about face masks. And she was saying to me, it sounds like you're recommending that we should be wearing face masks all the time. That certainly can't be safe. People need to breathe. And so maybe just touch a little bit on how much we've learned about face masks since this started.
Yeah, and it's an interesting observation because people talk about, I can't breathe through a face mask. It is maybe a little bit more difficult because it does restrict the airflow a bit. I'll be honest with you, for me personally, it's not a problem at all. Having said that, there may be people that have particular breathing issues that an N95, I know we have some staff that's not recommended for them. But a face mask has been proven over and over and over again to be really, really, really important. So I would not change my opinion on that one bit. Having said that, I can't speak to all persons' issues with their breathing, and so they need to work that out with their own personal physician. I would say, though, that the vast, vast majority of people have no problem wearing a face mask. I mean, I have my surgical mask here. For most people, that's not a problem at all. I would say the idea that, you can't get air, it allows air through. I would never consider spray painting today without a mask on, but I'm going to be able to breathe through that mask, but it prevents the larger particles from getting through. And that's all it means is, the air particles can still get through. It does restrict it some. So for some people that have a real problem breathing, they need to talk with their doctor, but that's very, very small percentage of the population. So it's still very important. Having said that, when you say all the time, if you're at home by yourself or with a spouse or with a safe group that you've committed to each other, you don't have to be wearing a mask in your house. If I'm working outside and there's nobody around, I'm not wearing a mask. If I'm outside walking, when Lucy and I bike on the Perkiomen Trail, even just passing other people, it's not long enough to really have an interaction. I do know, though, when we've been on the trail riding, which we've been doing regularly now, she has paid attention to how close we are to people in front of us because, they're breathing and it's coming back. And she's like, let's back off a little bit. That may or may not be of critical importance, but it is showing that we're thinking about that. But masks are not required in every situation, but certainly when you're with people that you don't know where they've been, where you're in larger groups of people, grocery stores or whatever, absolutely wear a mask in those public spaces. Absolutely. It makes a difference. And we obviously aren't wearing masks here. We're so appropriately socially distanced. But when I'm in my office by myself, I'm not wearing a mask. When I exit my office door, my mask goes on, even if it's just to go around the hall to the bathroom. And so it's those kind of ideas that are important to keep in mind.
And this particular resident was reflecting that it's difficult because she's watching the news and there's a panel and one doctor is saying you need to wear a mask when you're in public and the other doctor is saying no, don't do that because you want to be able to breathe better. So it does seem like there's conflicting information, but I was sharing with her that even based on our personal experience here at Living Branches, we've seen the benefit of face masks in preventing the spread.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And I would never argue with, and I'll call a legitimate doctor, because there are doctors out there that are saying things that are not appropriate to say. And who knows what their motivation is. But having said that, if there's a doctor that says my patient has breathing difficulties and they should not wear a mask or they should not wear an N95, if that is a trustworthy doctor and acting on the best behalf, absolutely. But that's, again, going to be such a small portion of the population.
Wow. And that's information about a patient that doctor knows, not a general statement.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. The other question that I've gotten a lot this week has to do with voting. So as we come closer to the general election, there certainly seems to be an interest in our residents to make sure that they can get out and vote. So maybe let's share a little bit of information, especially for Dock Woods residents, because it's different this year than last year.
Yeah, that's right. And we have a polling place at Dock Woods, and so that is different. And as much as I'd love to tell people who to vote for, I'm not going to do that, obviously. That's not part of this program or anything that's appropriate for me to do. But having said that, we do want people to be able to go out and vote for who they feel are the best persons to represent us. But unfortunately, we are not able to have it on campus at Dock Woods this year. So that will be in another local polling place, and the staff at Dock Woods will be communicating that. So we're going to try to work with people, particularly in healthcare and personal care too, to make sure that people have the ability to vote if they're not able to go off campus. So we're working at those things, but the polling place at Dock Woods will not be able to happen again this November.
And it will be a challenge for our residents who are in personal care, memory care, or health care, because at least right now, the information that we have coming from the DOH and DPW is that, or DHS, is that their only reasons they're able to leave campus are for medical or health appointments. So this does not fall under that category. So they really their families need to help them start planning ahead.
Yeah, and there are ways you can do that. So we want to make it available for people. So there will be communication coming out on the campuses.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's it. Anything else you want to share?
Well, the only other thing is, on the Souderton campus, there's been an Out and About with George, And George, for those of you, particularly at Souderton, you probably know who this guy is. This happens to be a flat George. The real George is almost as big as I am. And George makes his way around, and someone on the Souderton campus, Amy Durr, takes care of this. And she has out and about with George. George has gotten acupuncture. He's been, I think he might have been on a fire truck maybe one time. I can't remember. And now the joke is people are taking flat George out and about. So today, George is out and about with a video with Ed and Alex. And so Flat George is making his debut today. So welcome, George. Good to have you here.
Very nice to see you, George. He's coming with me. We are going to college trips. So he's heading off to higher education for the weekend.
So he's going to check out colleges and see who gives monkeys the best scholarships. So we'll be interested to hear that.
I will report back. All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to visit our website at livingbranches.org. You can email your questions to coronavirusquestions@livingbranches.org, and we'll see you next week.